Hello, in this case we're going to be modeling a couch, and the reason behind this is that we need to learn how the textures for fabric materials work. And we're also going to be practicing a bit more our polygon modeling. Now we need to cover this before we jump into the interior design that each one of us is going to do. So without further ado, let's get started. Now the first step is to create a reference box, as always, in which we're going to be referring for our dimensions. So let's go ahead and create a box. And this box will have a 50 centimeters in height. So from the floor to the seat, we'll have 50 centimeters. Now for our width, let's make it at 240 centimeters. And actually, let's just use the length for this value to 40 centimeters. And now for our width, let's give it 90 centimeters. Now for our back, we'll be using the same method as we did for our chair. So let's right click it and convert it to Edit Poly. And we're going to be grabbing these two edges and connecting them. So let's go to the Edit Edges tab and connect. Let's drag this edge over here. Now let's press 4 for polygons. Right click and extrude them. And our back here is going to have around 40 centimeters. And okay. Now we have our reference and let's start modeling. Let's go to a left view, and in here, let's change this perspective to orthographic. And we're going to start off with the arms for our couch. And in the same way, again, as we did our chair, we're going to be starting with a plane. So let's go ahead and create a plane here, and I can't actually do it in this view. So let's go to a left view. In this viewport, let's press the G key to deactivate the grid, and now we can use this. Okay, I don't need as many segments as I have right now, so let's just reduce one in the width and right click and convert this to an edit poly. So now by using the vertices, we're going to be creating a smooth curve in the corners. So let's pick these vertices and give them another type of shape. So what I'm looking for, it's a triangular smooth shaped geometry. So let's pick these two and make them a little bit thinner. These two, these guys over here, and finally the ones at the bottom, like so. And remember that I also want to have a smooth transition in the corners. So for this, I'm going to just drag them out like this. So let's make sure that everything is aligned. These guys at the top, they need to be a little bit more thinner. Okay, so now our next step is to pick all of these polygons. And let's just make an inset of this. So right click and inset. Let's make it 2 centimeters. And now I'm going to inset it once again. And this time we're only going to have 0.5 centimeters. And let's inset it once more to 2 centimeters. So this is going to be basically the shape of my arm for our couch. Now what I want to do is to make a loop out of these polygons here. Right click it, extrude it, and we're going to be extruding them inwards. So let's make this -5 around, or that's a bit too much. Let's actually go for -2 and check it. All right, so we have this kind of shape. Now it looks kind of funny right now, but let's try out a Turbosmooth. So Turbosmooth. And there we go. Now let's add an extra iteration here. And you can see that this arm is looking pretty good right now. And now I can actually just pull it up a bit. So let's go back into our edit poly and make sure to be following our reference. So we can just pull this guys up a little bit more. And don't forget to keep it well aligned. Okay, now the next step that we have to do is just to create this cloth typed material. And for this, I'm going to go ahead and bring in an FFD 4x4, go inside my control points, and I'm basically just going to inflate this exterior part here. So let's pick these 4 control points in our outer face, and let's just drag them out like so. Maybe adjust a bit more, something like this, and maybe I'll just grab these guys at the top and pull it like this. All right, this is looking great. Now what I need to do is just to create the whole arm at this side and then our back. And I'm obviously not going to go all the way like this in a U shape, but I'm going to use asymmetry. So we're only going to be modeling half of it. Now for this, I'm going to go back to my edit poly and now my border. So I want to pick this border in order to just drag it out and start creating this L here for my couch. So what do we need to do in this case is to press the shift key so that we can extrude borders. So because it's an open surface, we have this border and we can actually press the shift key to drag it out like so. Okay, so for this, let's go to the top view. And at this point, what I want to do is to create this curvature here. So let's press the shift key again. And now by using the X and Y axis, I can press the shift once again and start making this U-shaped geometry. Now we're a bit off from our reference. Let's go back to our vertex mode and grab all of these and drag them inwards again, like this. Now let's pick our border with our 3 key and keep rotating it like so. Now let's hit the E key just to rotate it a bit more. Now our R to bring in the scaling, and make sure that we're scaling it in the X and Y. So this is going to be our second option here in order just to scale it proportionally for our sides. If I would go to the first option, for instance, I would scale it like this, which is something that I don't want because then our proportions will be out. So this edge here would have a different scale than the edge that I'm working in right now. So obviously we need something like this, and make sure to be aligning it to the reference, which we are not at this point. So I'm going to pick the vertices again and try to align them like so. I'm going to bring this back a bit. Now shift and keep rotating it with our E key and scaling it so that the proportions stay the same. Now I can pick and loop all of these edges by double clicking and making it a little bit thicker. Let's unselect this edge here, and now I can start extruding this in this way. Let's go ahead and pick this edge and make sure that the scaling is the same as this one over here. Again, so we have to be very careful with this, not to lose the scale because it's going to look funny if we don't scale it properly. Okay, now let's grab the last border here. With our W key, we can bring it all the way to the midpoint, and we need to align this edge here. So with our R key, and again, make sure that we have the X and Y in. And now with our Y key, I'm going to align it in this axis. Notice that this part is way thinner than this part over here. So what we can do is keep scaling it until we get the right proportions. Make sure that you're in the edge option, and by double clicking, we can just loop it. Deselect this with the Alt key. And now scale it like so. So it's not that thin. All right. And it's still a little bit too thin here. Okay, we're getting there. Just a tiny bit more in this side. Okay, and finally the last adjustment for this border here, and there we go. Now let's go back to our final FFD 4x4. Okay, so right here we have a mess because the FFD 4x4 is actually acting on top of all of our geometry, which we don't want, so let's delete it, and we can create something similar to what we had in a bit. So for our next step, we need to add a symmetry modifier. We obviously don't want it in the Z-axis, but on the X-axis. And let's actually flip it. Let's go inside the mirror, and with our gizmo, we can just drag it out like this. Now make sure down here that we have the weld seam. Okay, we can actually select all of the symmetry and follow our reference once again. Now we need to add an inferior support for our couch. And for this, I'm going to just create a simple box. So let's go ahead and go into our standard primitives and select the box. Let's actually go to the top view just to make this as precise as possible. And this is only going to be covering this part right here. Okay, now let's follow the reference once more. Right click, convert to edit poly. Let's pick the top face and let's go all the way until we go to the midpoint. So let's go to the left view to be a bit more precise about this. we actually can pull this base all the way in, okay? And let's just hide the reference for now. So right click, hide selection. And now let's drag this a little bit up here. And you can see how this looks in the interior. It's looking pretty nice. Let's just drag it all the way to the back. And there we go. Now our edges from this support also need to be chamfered. So let's go ahead and add a chamfer modifier. Obviously we want this chamfer to only be on the edges. So down here in smoothing output, let's change this from smooth entire object to smooth chamfers only. Let's go ahead and modify a little bit our chamfer options. So the amount, we can leave it at 2 centimeters, and the segments, we can actually go for 2 of them to make it smoother, like so. Okay, so our next step is to verify that this is actually in a good shape. And in this part here, we have a problem as it's way too thin compared to this arm here. So we can fix this by adding in a FFD 4x4 right now. And let's go inside our control points, and we can just pick these two and drag them like so. I can also just modify the corner. And actually let's delete this FFD 4x4, and to have a symmetry going on, we can go back to our Turbosmooth and add an FFD 4x4 again. Just drag all of these out like so, and now our corners. Let's go to our symmetry, and this is looking better. Now we need to create the cushions, and they're also going to be created with a simple box. So let's go ahead and activate the outer grid to place this box on top of our existing support. Now we can go ahead and convert it to an edit poly and drag them a little bit upwards. So I need the reference at this point, right click, unhide all. And let's just bring this pillow into its rightful position. Now I no longer need my reference. I have all the dimensions here that I need. So because I want to inflate, if you will, a bit this pillow, I want to also add an FFD 4x4. However, we don't have the necessary segments on it, so we need to add an extra segments. Let's go ahead and pick these 4 edges and connect them. Let's say 6 times in this side, and also let's go ahead and pick these edges here, and we can actually just add 5 for this side, so that we end up with something like this. Now we can just pick the edges from the top part like so, and also from the bottom part. Okay, now let's right click and chamfer this. Let's go ahead and add, say, a 1.5 centimeters in chamfer will do, and also let's pick this number 2 for our segments in between the chamfers, and let's just click it like this. Alright, let's unselect the edge, and now what I want to do is just to inflate, if you will, the center point of this cushion. So let's apply an FFD 4x4. Let's go ahead and pick the control points, and I only want to pick these 4 at the top. Now I'm just going to bring them upwards a bit. Obviously, my cushion has to take the geometry of my actual couch. So I'm going to pick all of these control points from this corner, and actually what I want to do is just to create another FFD 4x4 on top of this one. Okay, like so. Now let's go back to our top control points, and in here we will be able to follow the geometry from my couch. Like this. Let's just make it as precise as we can. Okay, now we can add a symmetry to keep everything symmetrical, of course. Let's go for X axis and flip it. Let's go inside the mirror and just bring it all the way over here, and it's actually the Y. Okay, great. Now one thing that we need to keep in mind is that these cushions need to be closer to each other, so we have to go back to our FFD 4x4, but the first one that we made, which is this one. We're going to pick all of these control points and just drag them in the Y axis for both of these cushions to meet. Alright, now I need to add an extra detail to these cushions here because they look a bit too simple. So for this, I'm going to right click and convert them to edit poly. So I'm happy with the shape that they have right now. Now it's time to just add an extra detail. So right click, convert to edit poly. I'm going to select the edge, but only from my midpoint here. And I'm going to also select it from this side. Let's go to the edit edges tab again. So create shape from selection. And actually before doing this, I also want to pick the bottom ones. Okay, let's go for create shape from selection. Let's go for a linear type and OK. Now let's actually select the splines that we just created, go to our rendering tab and enable in rendered and enable it in the viewport. Alright, so we didn't pick all of the edges, it seems. So let's Ctrl Z it again, pick the edges and let's just loop it. Create shape from selection, linear. And let's actually grab these splines once again, enable it in viewport and also in rendered. We obviously want this to be radial, but this is a bit too exaggerated. Let's try 0.7 centimeters. And the sides, I want them to be a little bit smoother. So I'm going to increase the sides to 30. Okay, now let's go for the interesting part. So how do we create pillows here in 3ds Max? So for this, we're going to be looking at collisions. So let's go ahead and create an example. I'm going to create a plane and also I'm going to create a box. Let's go to our clay mode and F4. Now, how do physics work here in 3ds Max? We can actually call them in using modifiers. And the reason that I created this plane here at the bottom is for it to act as the ground. And we're going to be colliding this box into the ground, which is my plane here. So we're going to mimic reality using a cloth modifier. So let's see how this works. Now the object that we want to collide is this box here. So we need to apply the cloth modifier. So it's going to mimic, once again, a cloth typed geometry in real life. And it's going to basically just crash against the ground, which is my plane. So we actually need to tell the cloth modifier which geometry is going to be our ground for our box to collide into. For this, we're going to open the object properties. And in here, we're going to find our box, which is our, in this case, let's take it as our pillow. And we're going to have to add our plane to this list. So let's go ahead and add objects. And it's gonna open our layers tab. So we need to pick the plane 00002 in this case and add it. Now we're going to be talking about layers in a minute. Now, we need to also tell this modifier that our box is actually going to be our cloth. And here inside our cloth properties, we actually need to add a preset. So let's go ahead and see what kind of presets we have. And the one that we're interested in right now, it's in the silk preset. So this option right here is going to act as a silk material in real life. So let's go ahead and select it. And you can see how it adopts, if you will, all of the parameters of a real life silk. Its density, its compression, its stretch values, and so on. Down here, you can see that we have the collision object option, but this is not the collision object. The collision object is actually our plane down here. What we do need to tell it, it's the pressure. So the pressure here, it's telling us that it's going to be inside the enclosed cloth volume. So let's go ahead and type in a 35 for now. And now let's actually tell which one is our ground. So let's go ahead and select our ground. And it's not going to be a cloth or anything. It's just a plain ground that this object is going to fall into. So it has to be inactive, just like a rock or something similar to it. And we also need to tell it that this is actually a collision object. Activate this and let's go ahead and press OK. Down here we have the simulation parameters. So the one that we're going to be using is this simulate local. So let's go ahead and press it. Alright, so this is happening because what's really dragging this cloth are actually our vertices. But we don't have enough vertices for this physical simulation to happen. So let's change that and we can reset all of this simulation by going down here, and we can see under selected object manipulation, we have this reset state option. So let's just reset it. And now let's go back to our box and let's cut the cloth, because if I go back to my box, it's going to mess things up. And now in our box, we should give it a 50 segments in length and 50 segments in width. Now this can be a bit too much. So let's go ahead and type in a 35 by 35 there. All right, so because we've changed all of the parameters from this specific geometry and we kept the same parameters on our cloth modifier, we should actually create another one. So let's bring in the cloth modifier, and again, object properties. Let's add the objects, which is the plane 2. So we need to tell the box once again that this is going to be our actual cloth and it has to act as a silk. Now the pressure is going to be around 30. Let's go to our plane. This is an inactive geometry and it's actually a collision object. Let's press OK once more. And now let's simulate this object. Alright, so there we go. Now if we wanted to add extra detail to this pillow in this case, we can go down here and we can change the simulation parameters. So in here we have this centimeter value. If we increase, let's say to 5 centimeters, it's going to affect the way in which the segments and vertices are going to be reacting to the collision object. Take it as if we were actually creating more iterations within our Turbosmooth. So obviously, the higher this value, the more the simulation is going to take. Also for the subsamples here, so let's not mess with the subsamples because the subsamples is actually going to make a more precise simulation, but it's going to take a toll on our PC's memory. So let's leave it as it is. And then we have the number of frames in which the simulation is going to act. So let's leave these values as it is. And actually 5 centimeters is a bit too high too. Let's go for 3 centimeters and let's reset the state and start our simulation once more. Okay, now you can see that the actual vertices and edges are acting a bit better than they were. So let's actually add 5 centimeters, reset the simulation once again, and simulate it again. So it's actually a bit too inflated. So we actually need to change this in our box parameters. Let's actually delete this cloth, and in our box parameters, we can actually make this way thinner. Let's use a 0.2 centimeters. And let's go ahead and add a cloth modifier once again. Object properties, let's go to add objects, plane 2, which is going to be, again, our collision object. We need this to be inactive and make it a collision object, obviously. Now let's go back to our box. This is our cloth. Select the silk and the pressure. Let's go all the way to 35 this time and hit the OK button. Simulate local now. Okay, and this is actually a little bit better. Now we can add an FFD 4x4 and start controlling our geometry here. So if we want to give it a little bit more of detail, we could by using the control points. Like so, we can actually reduce the inflation that this pillow has by grabbing all of these control points in here. And let's just reduce it like so. And actually the top ones we have to control. Alright, we can also add a bit of extra detail by introducing a new modifier. So I want some kind of wavy effect in this pillow here. And I can do that by going into my modifiers and add a noise modifier, just to add a little bit of wavy effect in this guy. So how does this noise modifier work? We have here the parameters, and the smaller the scale, the more it's going to be reflected on our noise. Here in the strength, we have to go to the Z, so it's going to be normal to this each phase. So let's just increase this a bit. And you can see how we start adding a little bit more of detail here. And if we just reduce the scale a bit more, we can bring this in a little bit more. So why reducing the scale matters? Because the scale is actually compressing all of this noise that I'm applying to my pillow. So if I go for a higher scale, it's going to make these waves a bit bigger. Now I can add a Turbosmooth on top of this just to smoothen everything up. And there we go. Now we're going to be exploring the noise modifier a little bit more when we are done with our couch here. Okay, so let's start adding some pillows to this couch. Now for this, I'm going to go to the box. And I'm going to create actually a box out here. And let's go to our top view just to see the scale of everything. I'm going to deactivate the auto grid because I don't want to draw this box on top of my cushions right now. So let's say that we're going to have a pillow that has this size. Let's bring it up here. Let's check the parameters of this box and make sure that we have around 0.1 centimeters in height this time. I'm going to just bring this up a bit and rotate it so that it simulates an actual pillow that is leaning against the back and also dropping on this cushion here. Let's add a cloth modifier, object properties, and add some objects. Now it's a bit difficult for me to see which object is my actual couch and the planes here. So let's cancel this and actually name these geometries. So for this, I need to call in my layers. So we know that the layers, if you remember the first lectures, are up here at the top. So let's go ahead and click Toggle Layer Explorer. And again, if you remember, we place all of these layers next to our command panel. Go into this tab here and we have all of our objects inside one layer. Now if I select my arms, we see that they're actually the plane 1. So we can rename this by clicking on it. We can actually just click it once and hold it for a second until this option appears, or we can even go and just select it by clicking once without holding it, right clicking, and go into the rename option. So this is actually going to be my couch. And we just need to click anywhere in our layers for that to be saved. And these are my cushions. So I'm going to select it and name it cushion. Now I know which are going to be my collision objects for this box here. Let's go back to our command panel, and inside our object properties, we're going to be adding these two objects now. And just before that, I actually want to rename this as my pillow. So let's go back to our layers, and this is actually our box number 5. So let's just click it once and name it pillow. There we go. Now let's go back to our command panel, object properties, and you can see now that this box is now named pillow. So let's go ahead and add some objects. And this time I know which one of these shapes it's my actual couch and my cushions. So I'm going to click on my couch and also cushion. I'm going to add these two, and now by selecting both of them, I can say that these two objects are going to be inactive. They're not going to be cloth or anything else, and they are actually going to be collision objects, both of them. Now let's go ahead inside our pillow, and this is actually a cloth, and the preset for this is silk. Again, let's add some pressure to this. Let's try in 50 to see just how this will act, and click OK. Before simulating, let's go ahead and see if our centimeters count is 5 centimeters, and let's start our simulation. So because we've added some extra centimeters to this, this is taking a bit too long, and also because we've added an extra pressure to this. So let's just wait for it for the moment. Okay, because the pressure is a bit too much, we can see some deformation in here. So it's moment to stop our simulation. We can stop it just by clicking again in simulate. So this is a bit more precise than the one we had last time, but because of the pressure, this has happened. And we can actually stop the simulation just before this happens. So let's go ahead and try that again. Let's reset the state and let's go inside our object properties. And this time our pillow will have a pressure of 30 centimeters. Okay, now let's start our simulation for the last time. Once we're getting to the bottom, don't forget to stop your simulation before your vertices start to act weird. There we go. I think this is looking really nice. And now the next step that we have to do is just to center this pivot from our newly created pillow here. And now that we're actually done with this pillow, we can actually just right click and convert it to an edit poly. Let's go to our hierarchy options, affect pivot only, and center to the object. Now let's give an extra detail to this. And we can do that by selecting these edges at the sides So I'm going to loop them like so. So we need to loop all of these sides like this. Extrude this and add an extra detail. So right click, extrude. Let's just reset all of these values. And now I can add a Turbosmooth to this. So Turbosmooth, and there we go. It's looking very nice. And now the other thing that we can do just to add a bit more detail is to add a noise modifier. So let's go ahead and try a noise. So remember that if we reduce the scale, we're compacting this effect. So let's bring in that Z noise like so. And now let's go ahead and go to our Turbosmooth. Okay, so this has lots of detail just by adding some noise to it. Okay, now I can copy this pillow over to this side. Just copy it, and I'm going to rotate this one and scale it a bit upwards. Like so. Okay, I can even just go and play with my pivot. So let's go ahead and change this from view to local. And I'm going to rotate it like this and center it a bit like so. Another thing that we can do is to make these cushions a bit more natural. And this is fairly easy. We could just add a Turbosmooth to it. As you can see, these edge details are a bit too straight. So let's make them smoother. We have multiple cloth modifiers here, and let's just collapse all of these by right clicking and convert them to Edit Poly. Now let's add a Turbosmooth. And let's increase also the iterations of it. Let's delete the previous splines. Now we need to scale them a bit better. And as always, we're going to be using the FFD 2x2 for this case. Go ahead and select the control points and scale them to match our bottom geometry. Again, convert them to an Edit Poly. Let's go ahead and select the edges. So double click to loop them. Okay, let's go to Edit Edges and create shape from selection. In this case, we're going to go and select the smooth option. And there, it's looking way better than before. Okay, so for our last bit, we're going to be creating the inferior support. So let's go ahead and create that using a box. Let's go to the top view and let's go ahead and create the box like so. Also, we need to decrease the segments count. A 1x1 should be okay. Right click and convert to Edit Poly. And let's just bring this a little bit down. And we can create some extra supports down here by using our splines and then using the lathe modifier. For this, I'm going to go to a left view. Let's go ahead into our splines. Let's select the line and deselect both of these rendering options. Okay, so first we need to create a base and then something like so will do. Let's go ahead and add a lathe modifier. And we can actually change the direction for which this is working. Okay, so Y is fine. Let's go inside the axis and just bring it out like so. Obviously, inside our line 2, we have to go ahead and tell it that the interpolation should be at 100 steps. And inside the lathe modifier, the segments should be okay at around 64. Okay, let's just place this underneath our whole couch. Let's go into our top view, and in our wireframe mode, we can just copy this and instance them. Let's grab both of them. I think we can actually put one here in the middle and one at the sides. Okay, so going back to our cushions, we need to add extra detail as well as we did up here. So let's press the F4 to see our edges. So let's go ahead and select one here and one over here in both sides. So double click to loop them. Create shape from selection. They are going to be smoothened out, and make sure to that we're working with a 0.7 centimeters in thickness. And finally, we also need to add a bit more detail to our inferior box. So right click, convert to Edit Poly, and once again we can select and loop this edge right here. And actually we don't really need to loop it because it's not going to be seen at the back. There we go. We can also do the same thing down here just to add an extra detail. And we can actually bring this face from our inferior support a little bit out here. First of all, let's match the height. Like so. And let's bring this face a little bit outwards. Okay, we also need to add these details to the edges of our arms. So let's go ahead and select the geometry and right click, convert to Edit Poly to collapse everything. Now that we've done with that, I'm going to loop this specific edge at this point, and I don't want to go all the way over here because this detail is going to look very odd if we drag it into the front part here. So we need to unselect it with the Alt key, and I just want it to start right here. So we can actually deselect all of this, and also the same thing to this side. So I want to start it from underneath the specific detail there. Okay, let's go to create shape from selection. It's going to be smoothing out, obviously. And maybe we can increase a tiny bit on the thickness. So 0.9 could do it. There we go. And obviously in this side too. So let's go ahead into our edges once more. And we can start it in here. Let's deselect all of the edges that we don't want to create a shape from. Okay, like so, and obviously this side too. There we go. Create shape from selection, and okay. For this pillow, we also need to add this extra detail at the border. So let's go ahead and convert it to an Edit Poly and select the mid edge right here. And we can actually add in the edit edges a create shape from selection. In this case, I'm going to use the linear one, and let's reduce it, obviously. There we go. Just an extra tiny detail there. Okay, everyone. So for the next lecture, we're going to be applying a material to this couch using some new components that are mostly used with silk and fabric. I'll see you there. Bye for now.